So until now, we've always been throwing a single item into the input of our machines, of our functions, right? Just like in the Sneetch machine, we can pull that up, right? One Sneetch goes in at a time, right? Each Sneetch goes in, and a Sneetch comes out with a star on it. However, with functions, you can actually have more than one input at the same time. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to make a new function called an adding machine. And it's going to take in two different inputs, number 1 and number 2, which I've separated by a comma. I'm not going to build the internals of that machine just yet. But what I want to do here is the way I want to use this machine is that I want the input to be two different numbers, and I want the output to be the sum of those two numbers. So specifically, if I said adding machine 2, 7, I want this machine to take those two inputs, add them together, and I want the output to be 9, since that is the sum of 2 and 7. So the output should be 9. Just let's get one other example up there. If I wanted to do 4 and 4, then the output should be 8. Because I wanted to take those two numbers, add it together, and give me the sum as the output. That's what I'm attempting to do here. So there's really nothing much more complicated about this than any of our previous examples. It's just this is the first time we've encountered the fact that you have the ability to have multiple inputs. When I throw in the 2, 7, the 2 gets assigned to the variable called number 1, and the 7 gets assigned to the variable called number 2. Why is that? Why does the 2 become the number 1 and the 7 become the number 2?
Position.
It's simply the order in which it's listed. So since I have number 1 first and number 2, when I have 2 first and 7, those go to their respective places. It's not because I call this number 1 and number 2. If I call this Fred and call this George, Fred becomes 2, George becomes 7, simply because of the order that it's in. Does that make sense? So, but number 1, number 2 is perhaps a better names for my variables. So I'll say output is number 1 plus number 2. And then I'm going to return the output. So this works. So the only new concept you've introduced here is the fact that you can have comma-separated variables and then comma-separated inputs that get thrown in and assigned to the respective variables. Any questions about this? Yeah. What happens if I use the machine this way and I try to throw in a third thing? I'm going to try to cram in a 2, a 7, and a 3. What's going to happen?
I don't think anything's going to happen just because it's going to return 9, or whatever, 9, because there's no...
You're saying it's going to ignore? It's going to ignore the 3.
Yeah.
Perhaps in a different language. But in Ruby, Ruby takes exception to it. And let's read the error message very carefully. And this, if you read this, it actually makes sense. Yeah. On line number 1, in an adding machine, wrong number of arguments, given 3, expected 2. It's saying we've expected 2, what they call arguments. We expected 2 inputs, but you gave us 3, so I blow up. What if I only put in 1 input, even though when I built the machine, I built it for 2? What will happen here? Not that you'll know, but just take a guess.
I mean, wrong number.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah. Here it says given 1, expected 2. So if you reserve space for 2 inputs when you build your machine, you must, when using the machine, give it 2 inputs. Those are the rules. Again, this machine is summing up my 2 inputs.
Would blank count if you said comma blank?
No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't.
So
It would blow up right here because if you have a comma, you need something after it. Yep. There are workarounds to this kind of thing, but we're not getting into that.
What if you did a string?
So
One
if I,
string and one number?
well, okay, good question. But let me ask a precursor to that. What would happen if I put in two strings? If I put in cat and fish, it will do catfish because it's basically taking this variable plus this variable, and we saw we could add strings together. So this machine is just following the literal instructions. This plus this. If you could add strings together, great. If you can add numbers together, great. Now returning to Kale's question, what if I tried to add a cat string plus a 2? It would blow up because just like I can't do string plus number, that's exactly what's going on over here because this number 1 is a nickname for a string, cat, and number 2 is a nickname for a number 2, and you cannot add those two together. You cannot add those two different data types together.